Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mary. I'm Head of Philanthropy at NCF for those who have not had the pleasure to meet so far. And I'm also the staff champion of UN SDG 5, Gender Equality. I'm really passionate and really proud to be the champion for this particular UN SDG because whilst it might not sound like it when you compare it with food poverty or health and well-being, for instance, it's a very challenging subject. For a lot of people, it's a very uncomfortable topic. We don't know how to talk about it. We'd rather ignore it, brush it under the carpet because we're not sure how to speak about it. For others, it's an issue of a bygone era. It was an issue of the 50s and 60s. It doesn't exist anymore. We don't need to worry about it. But I think it's really important that we get comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations and talking about the very real issues that affect women and girls, tackling them head on together. So many of you will have heard the news story of the last week about Sarah Everard, the 33-year-old woman who went missing. The reason I bring up her story is because in light of her disappearance, a lot of warnings to women and girls have been reiterated through social media, through the news, through the press. Things like don't walk alone, especially at night. Don't walk with headphones in, and if you're going to, try and take one out so you can hear your surroundings. Carry your keys in between your fingers when walking home or to your car. Now that might all sound like very good advice. It keeps you safe. The issue I have with it is it places the emphasis, the responsibility, the blame on the victim. And in my humble opinion, the blame should always live at the feet of the perpetrator. Why should women have to walk with only one headphone in? Why should we have to walk with our keys in our hands just in case? To highlight some of the other issues that women face, I've pulled together some statistics that I'd like to share with you. A report by UN Women UK found that 97% of women aged between 18 and 24 had been sexually harassed, and 80% of women of all ages had experienced sexual harassment in public. Approximately 85,000 women in England and Wales alone experience sexual assaults or rape every single year. Last year, there was only 2,102 prosecutions and 1,400 convictions of those attacks. Women still occupy the lowest paid jobs, with 3/4 of minimum wage jobs being held by women. Moreover, women spend 3 times as many hours as men doing unpaid domestic and household chores. We look after our children and elderly family more than the men do. The Financial Times reported in September 2020 that 90% of women still work for companies that pay them less than their male counterparts for doing exactly the same job. And as of June 2020, the House of Commons had 34% of women as representatives. That's the highest number we've ever had, yet still is only 1/3 of representatives. The pandemic has only heightened the inequalities that women face, with 70% of health and social care workers being women, working in care homes, working in the NHS, on the front line of this health crisis. Domestic violence has increased by 19% in Northamptonshire, with ongoing lockdowns making it close to impossible for victims to escape their attackers. As I say, it's uncomfortable to hear those statistics, but that's exactly why these conversations need to be had. The great thing is we have some amazing individuals and organisations based here in Northamptonshire who are doing incredible work to tackle these issues, and I'm delighted that some of them are here today to speak with me. We're joined by Susie Van Rooyen from the Good Loaf CIC, from Ribbon Robinson from Rush to the Den, Deepa Bakrania from Dostio Asian Women and Girls Association, Lauren Payne from Avon, one of our fund holders, and Joe Gordon, CEO of the Royal and Derngate and our NCF trustee. Together, we have the power to be the change, and we can improve the lives of women and girls in our county. As the first ever female Vice President of the United States said, I may be the first woman to hold this office, but I won't be the last. Together, we can tread the path to equality, because an equal world is a stronger world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing, first of all, those alarming statistics, which I think is a real wake-up call for the need to tackle and promote a gender equal world leading to 2030. Also, your inspiring words in relation to the work that's happening in the county and the call to action around gender equality, which is what these conversations are about. Do check out Mary's blog. It's really inspirational and will give you much food for thought in terms of the work that needs to be done on the ground and in our local area. And do check out our social media channels this week. We're sharing some examples of the fantastic activity happening in our communities to support women and girls and make a safer and more fairer world for them here on our doorsteps. Now, without much further ado, this community conversation is about us exploring some of the local solutions and some of the work going here on the ground, but getting from our panel some of their ideas, thoughts, observations and opinions about how we can tackle gender equality here in Northamptonshire. So welcome Jo, Susie, Nina, Deepa and Lauren, and thank you for being able to share your time with us today to help us work towards a more gender equal world. So without much further ado, we'll get on with the first question, but a little bit of housekeeping reminder. Whilst you're not taking part in the panel, do switch off and make yourself mute, and do switch off your video. There will be time for question and answers afterwards, so as we're going along, do pop your comments or questions in the chat box, and Sandy Godoy Messenger will be facilitating the Q&A and allowing you some time to ask questions directly to the panel. And then our chair and gender ally, Paul Southworth, will make some closing comments with a call to action. So, right, welcome everybody. The first question really gives you an insight into the panel and why they're here and what they do and why they care about gender equality. So, what local activity or commitments are you carrying out to help support and work towards a gender equal world? And this could be to help celebrate women's achievements, raise awareness against bias, or take action for equality. And this could be in your role as a donor, a trustee, being part of a giving circle, a local charity, or in a personal capacity. So first of all, if we go to Deepa from Dostio.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for having me today. My name is Deepa Bokrania. I'm the chair for Dostio Asian Women and Girls Organization. Dostio essentially means friendship, and the foundation of our organization is friendship. The key work is to bring women together from different heritage, culture, religion, women who are from South Asian backgrounds. We commit to advocate on behalf of Asian women, empowering them by providing opportunities and new avenues, supporting them to create, have their own self-help groups, and promote and enhance effective personal support networks. The aim is that they're able to lead an independent and fulfilling life. We work with over 1,000 women each year, and promoting equality of opportunity for developing skills, provide training, ESOL, supporting people, those who are unable to find work by overcoming barriers, which which are stopping them to probably move into or even closer to maybe paid employment, education, or volunteering. Each year, actually, we celebrate Women's Day with a lot of passion, a lot of food, party, dancing. And the thing is that we want to celebrate achievements. We give out if they've passed ESOL levels, they get certificates. We support them in challenging themselves in self-care, so they could have done some yoga sessions or walking, and we give out gift vouchers, kind of just to celebrate their achievements. I guess from the BME women sector experience, where women from BAME background already face inequalities, you know, due to structure, social and economic conditions. We've seen that the current pandemic has had a huge disproportionate impact. You know, many years of austerity, cultural trends means that girls are expected to do more, you know, cooking, cleaning, looking after siblings compared to boys. You know, and obviously that has had a devastating impact on women. They've had to look at more rising care needs, you know, providing unpaid care for children, friends, family. We've also seen an increase in domestic abuse, you know, and they are struggling to turn for help. And I think also the change of environment to digital platform has been particularly challenging for women from BME backgrounds in learning and adapting new technology. So most of last year for our organization, we've helped them to be able to now get on Zoom, make FaceTime calls. So we've kind of really worked hard, and these women now do their own sort of Zoom sessions and meetings and everything. So yeah, I think, you know, that's what we are passionate about, is sort of supporting our women.
Thank you, Deepa. It sounds like Dostio are doing a lot of incredible work to lift women up, help them build their aspirations, stay safe and well, but also make sure that they have access to services in a way where Asian women may be disproportionately impacted by the current pandemic, and also may experience discrimination from having access to other services too. Thank you. Over to Susie. Susie from The Good Loaf. You introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you're working towards a gender equal world.
Hi Rachel, sorry, I've got a print in my background. Stop in a second. So at the Good, we have 3 members, and that's like I always describe it as like a theatre. That's the stage of what we do, but behind the curtain, there's a lot more that goes on. So we offer work experience, paid work, and volunteering in our cafes to women who have struggled with poverty, unemployment, and offending, or all 3 of them. But behind the scenes, we do domestic abuse courses, we do well-being type courses, and we do a lot around employability, so supporting ladies with kind of interview skills, CV writing, all that kind of stuff that helps them to get a job. I think apart from the kind of like practical stuff we do in the practical cafes we run and the work experience that we offer, I think the kind of backbone of what we're trying to do is to help women become the apart from being seen as the problem in their society, because a lot of women that we work with have seen that, you know, they've been in trouble with the police and things like that, but to help them become a solution to the community that they live in, rather than being seen as the problem. And a lot of that is about recognizing that success for different women is different. So for one lady, just it might be menial for you, but for her, actually getting out of bed and coming to a placement every day and getting her kids to school is a big thing for her, and that might not be a big thing for somebody else. But just, you know, really trying to just have the equality and celebrating success for people, not the equality and what that success is, because it's different for each person. So I think that's kind of our overarching aim, is to celebrate success for each person as an individual, for what that means to them, and just help them to become a solution in the community they live in, rather than be seen as the problem.
Thank you, Susie. It sounds like the work the Good Loaf are doing is really supporting vulnerable women, and also helping women find a recourse back to their community after perhaps spending time within the criminal justice system, and help them tackling some of their core issues in order to help them build the kinds of lives that they would like to take forward, safe livelihoods and meaningful work. Thank you very much. We now move to Nina. Nina from Rush to the Den, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your work and how you're helping work towards a gender equal world.
Hello everybody, thank you very, very much for allowing me to come and voice what Rush to the Den's doing in our community. We are two charities. We've got the Rush to the Den Youth Club and the Rush to the Den Tots and Adults. Because of COVID, we've also diversified and been helping the community as much as possible. We've been keeping an eye on our families throughout the area, making sure that they are if they feel stuck at home, then obviously they've got an outlet, being able to have support groups with us. So right from the unlock of the first lockdown, we started our COVID support groups. They've been bubbles, and they've been specific bubbles so people can access us and come in with their children during the last two lockdowns as well. We're still doing that until the end of April. At the same time, we're assisting parents with all age ranges of children. So we've got, as I say, babies groups, tots groups, children's and school age groups going through. We're making sure that everybody feels safe. If they don't feel safe, unfortunately, we've had to refer to other services to get additional support into the families. We've had to make phone calls for emergency services for families. We wouldn't have been able to do that to allow the parents, the mothers, particularly with the children, to be safe if it wasn't for the fact that they felt comfortable in coming into us. We're seeing extra people that we can't support with bubbles through food donations as well, which is also alleviating some of the stress and the other options that are going on. We have extra support groups going on and starting up again now that the lockdown 3 is finally starting to lift, where we're going back to our cooking on a budget, being able to facilitate as many of our families as we can, especially the ladies who are feeling very financially crippled at the moment, which is adding to extra stress and adding to extra issues within the family environment. So we're dealing with as much as we can possibly deal with. We are running private one-to-one freedom programs for ladies that have been victims of domestic abuse. I am sitting quite regularly with a box of tissues with ladies and then pointing them in the right direction of additional help and supporting them, unfortunately, through some of the extra issues and investigations that could be needed, as they can't get to their families during the lockdowns, and they need their support system, or a support system in place because of sexual abuse, etc. Having been a victim of sexual abuse myself, I feel that I'm open enough for them to be able to come to me. They don't know it, but they already know that by talking to me that they are not actually telling me anything I don't already understand in that respect. So they feel more open to talking to me or having support from the team at Rush to the Den while they're going through those situations. So that's in a nutshell, along with the other, obviously, support factors that we're doing from an earlier age through the youth clubs as well when they're in school age. So we only have one rule, which is respect, and that's throughout all of Rush to the Den. Doesn't matter whether it's parents, toddlers, children, or school age, teenagers, everybody's of the same respect factor. And the more we try and progress that respect with the both genders within the youth club setting, especially, hopefully the future is going to be slightly more proactive and positive for the young ladies that are heading into adulthood. So that's us in a bit of a nutshell.
Well, first of all, Nina, thank you for sharing, and thank you for your obvious empathy and professionalism, where you're providing a safe space for especially vulnerable women who may be experiencing male violence or sexual violence, but also the educational work that you're doing with young people and with their families, and providing a safety net, which is clearly reducing financial stress for women and their families at this time. Thank you for joining us.
No,
Over to Jo. Jo, Chief Executive of the Royal and Dungate Theatre and also a trustee of the Community Foundation. Jo, what are you doing in terms of your work to help support a gender equal world?
I guess just to say, you know, what a sort of so inspiring hearing from the people we've heard from already and the organisations and the individuals that are working so specifically in this area. I'm a very proud trustee of the foundation and sit on our grants panel, and I'm always very inspired as we get to see the strength of these extraordinary applications from people that are working specifically in this area across our region, and my desire to support, enhance, amplify the work of all these brilliant charities providing support across the town is fantastic. I guess I'll talk with the Royal and Dungate hat on, but also the core at Corby Cube. I am chief exec in Corby, in the north of our county now, and I guess from the point of view, you know, many of you have been, no doubt, to the theatre spaces that we have, and so many people access the theatre in different ways. So whether that's people that attend a show, whether that's Sarah Millican or Kinky Boots on the stage, whether it's local artists that come to be part of our professional support programs, whether it's young people involved in some of our workshop activity, or indeed people accessing films through the Film House. It's absolutely essential for us that gender equality is evident throughout all of those aspects. And that's very central to kind of our ethos. We are very mindful of gender equality. We're also mindful of the inequalities that exist, and that not everybody experiences inequality in the same way, and that the situation is obviously quite a lot worse for those that also face other types of discrimination. So our kind of focus around equality isn't always specific to gender, it's specific to all kinds of things, but we have to take the responsibility of the work that we put on our stages in providing a platform for women alongside men, whether that's because we are committing to supporting female creatives. Female creatives have often been underrepresented in our industry, and I still find it kind of astounding that I'll see theatres announce brand new shows with a male director, a male set designer, a male lighting designer, a male, and it's that kind of statement around that not being acceptable, and wanting to ensure that diversity is amongst the heart of everything, particularly the work that we produce. I'm very proudly showing a Worst Witch poster behind me here, which was a Christmas show for us a few years ago that had an entirely female cast, and apart from one male musical director, had a completely female creative team. That's very unusual. It also went on, I'm proud to say, to win the Olivier for Best Family Show this year. So it's that kind of proof that actually female-led work can be viewed and platformed in the same arenas as male work. You know, I could list off a whole ream of absolutely brilliant things that are going on across the industry at the moment to platform female voices. So for us, some of it is about display. It's about providing a visual representation of women in our industry, women in the stories that we tell on our stages. It's also about the things that you don't always see, though, the projects that we're doing as part of the theatre, whether that's about projects that are specific to different groups, whether that's you know, we're doing one at the moment with the core about mums returning to work after long absences and how to enhance confidence in order to be able to do that. We're working with a group that is specific to creatives that are also mums that perhaps have kind of changed their kind of view of themselves professionally as they've become mums and are still keen to connect and create together. So for us, it's about platforming opportunity. It's about visually representing and I guess critically embedding that in everything that we do and being visible with it. We're conscious we are, you know, a high profile charity in the town, a high profile business in the town, if you can call it that. So actually I am very mindful that I'm trying to remember, Mary did such a brilliant job with statistics at the start of this, but there's businesses with at least 30% women in leadership roles are 15% more profitable. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of for us to display as well with me as CEO in how I shape our leadership team, is providing a platform for leaders, emerging leaders, and not ignoring gender equality in that. So from our perspective, it's less on the ground specific support, but more about actually taking the responsibility of that platform.
Well, thanks for that, Jo. You really highlight the importance of embedding gender equality and working towards it within working culture. And I think particularly being able to profile and create a platform and a space for women artists to succeed and have their work showcased. Congratulations on The Worst Witch. You're making me think of the Macbeth line, by the prick of my thumb, something wicked this way comes. And I mean wicked in a good sense. Wicked women all over the world doing good stuff. And I think it's really important to highlight the added value work that the theatres are doing in terms of their employment outreach for women and girls, as you've mentioned with the core at Corby Cube. So thank you. Last, but certainly by no means least for their introduction, Lauren from Avon, welcome. What are you and your colleagues working towards in terms of supporting a gender equal world?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this panel, and some familiar faces because of the projects and initiatives that we have supported. And just to echo what Mary said at the introduction, for me, International Women's Day and the fact we're having this panel discussion this year feels ever the more significant, particularly with the conversations in the media this week. So I think it's really great that we have this group of women together. I'm sure many people will know of Avon as an organisation in Northamptonshire and often think of us as a global organisation, but we've had our roots in the county for 60 years in the UK, and I myself have worked with local charities throughout my career, and we're really proud to support the Northamptonshire Community Foundation. We have a very simple mission across the globe, and that is to improve the lives of women, because a better world for women is a better world for all. And that mission statement exceeds to our local work. So we set up the Avon Fund for Women and Girls in 2016. And in that time, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've raised over £30,000 for local support groups like the amazing Rush to the Den and the Good Loaf, who are on the call today. And really what we wanted to do in actually 2 years ago is make sure that this fund was really targeted in an issue that isn't spoken about and something that we've championed at Avon since 2008, and that is gender-based violence. The pandemic has absolutely highlighted this issue. It didn't cause domestic abuse, but instances of it absolutely skyrocketed. Women were ever more isolated, trapped at home with a perpetrator, cut off from support. And so that's why when the pandemic began, we really laser focused our work when it comes to supporting our communities and our national projects on gender-based violence. So I have heard, I'm sure River might share shortly, some of the first-hand work we have done in the community to help women and girls that are in abusive relationships to still maintain that support during the pandemic. I think it is staggering that we still see this in the news today, that women don't have access to the support, and we're really passionate at Avon making sure that those in our community have that. I also wanted to just touch upon something that Jo said, because as a company that is founded in sharing women's stories and having voices heard, we've recently done some research that women's voices only make up 24% of any external media, external platforms, and that has to change. And that's whether we're doing a forum like this, whether you're going to the cinema, whether you're just out and about and reading what is happening for women in the community. And that's why we're really passionate that we not just do this work, we don't just do this work, we talk about it, we discuss it, so that other people follow in our footsteps. So yeah, we're really proud of the work we do, but also humbled every time we hear the stories from Susie and River about the impact.
Thank you, Lauren. Just to say, on behalf of Community Foundation and groups we fund on your behalf, the work we do with you, we are really delighted to be working in partnership with Avon, and thank you to your generosity and your commitment to really funding essential work on the ground, which is helping support the lives of women and girls, empowering them amplifying those women's voices, but also challenging some of those really serious issues and keeping women safe from harm. Thank you very much for joining us today. Okay, so that gives you a broad introduction of some amazing and inspiring women on our panel, the work that they're doing that's committed towards gender equality. So we're going to start kicking off with some questions and working towards some local solutions for Northamptonshire in order to tackle gender equality by 2030. As you can see, we have a long way to go, but we have lots of inspiring people, projects and activities which can help build towards that future. So the next question to our panel, Malala Yousafzai is an activist for female education and the youngest Nobel Prize laureate. I'm sure you're all well aware of her and her bravery. But she famously said recently, "I raise up my voice, not so that I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. We cannot all succeed when half of us are held back." So with this in mind, and with further resources, what local solutions would you like to see being funded? And is there any specific gender equality needs you think are an urgent priority? And this could be around diversity and inclusion, education, employment, women-led projects. Over to Deepa.
Yeah, hi. You know, like Rachel, you mentioned about Malala, who rightfully said one thing, which is education is the most powerful weapon. You know, education is the only solution. And I think that is quite the key here. I feel one of the main priority would be access to education and employment opportunities, because that's how you can empower women, give them that voice. And I feel that having those opportunities for women and girls, by helping them overcome social, cultural, and gender equality barriers would be a great start. I also feel sort of more specific support for women fleeing domestic abuse, people from the BME backgrounds. There isn't much specific service out there, but there is a great need. So I think projects like those. I feel the challenge here, is due to the years of disinvestment in the sector, losing valuable resources such as already existing women-led organizations like ourselves due to withdrawal of investment. I feel the task for Dostio as an Asian women and girls organization is huge, as it's a holistic organization advocating gender equality for women, and could be at the risk of probably not being able to sustain services at current level. We would like to see sort of more local services and support being ring-fenced to continue delivering inclusion projects for the BME communities, as well as sort of develop further engagement and empowerment projects as an urgent priority. I think especially after the pandemic, which has taken a lot of people 3 steps behind. So I think that's what I feel, especially since the last year. The gap, the need has just widened really broad.
Thank you, Deepa. I think you made a really important point there in terms of gender equality and intersectionality, and how there are multiple barriers for females within the BAME communities, and the need to address fair and balanced funding resource to those communities as well. I think it's a really important point you made about education and employment, being able to empower women, as well as making sure that funds are ring-fenced for specific issues such as domestic abuse within the community. And of course, more investment in general into the sector to support women and girls and sustain those projects that are doing such fantastic work. Thank you. Susie, what are your urgent priority needs in terms of working towards gender equality? I'm sure there will be a few.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that it's really important that we recognise and understand that supporting people is around inequality of outcome, not inequality of service. So often you think, okay, you'll deliver a course, or you know, people can go to college or what have you. But actually, if people have had different journeys, and as we heard from some of those horrendous statistics at the beginning, it's more likely that a woman or a girl has suffered trauma at some point in their life than a male, and that is just a statistic. So surely, if different problems, surely the solutions need to be different as well, because if what's brought somebody to a place of needing support has had unique circumstances, then surely they need a unique solution and support. So I think, you know, if we can look at women and girls, and instead of thinking in situations what's wrong with her, but maybe think what's happened to her, it casts our mind back to those statistics around sexual abuse and domestic abuse and things like that, and then think, what does she need to support her to get the same outcome that maybe somebody else would get without having had those traumatic events in their life. So definitely, for me, it's about an equality of outcomes rather than equality of service, and recognizing that that does need to be gender. And it's not saying that men don't need support or boys don't need support. It's just that they need, you know, men and women often need different support because they've had different journeys.
I think that's a really, really important point, Susie, there about not one size fits all. People have different journeys,
yeah.
and people have different aspirations, different experiences, and about really humanizing services so that they're not standardized and prescriptive, but that you can provide gender specific support and activities that help support the individual based on their needs and their direct experiences, and not setting the bar too high or too low depending on that individual and what it is that they require as women. So that really important point about inequality of outcome versus inequality of service. Thank you. We now go over to Nina. Nina, what do you feel are the urgent priority needs for tackling gender equality from your work and insights?
Okay, well, I agree with Deepa and Susie wholeheartedly, but there are a couple of other things that we can do that I think would actually help to tackle future issues, and that is actually to educate the young people themselves, to go through something similar to the Freedom Programme prior to them actually needing it, to actually get to pick who is, or to teach the young ladies who do look after them, who would be the right fit for them as a partner, to give them open choices, and not just a mindset of, well, this is how it happened at home, so this is how my partner, my future partner might be, and I make my bed, I lay in it type thing. And also educating the males in a similar sort of way, in the respect of, this is the respect that young ladies and women in the future need, and so therefore trying to eliminate some of the issues that are actually occurring from the source prior to them actually happening. So not only doing the after the effects and picking up the pieces, but the educational side of it before, empowering the young ladies, empowering the young men to be better young men, empowering the equality from a youth perspective, to bring that through to the future. So that's the bit I feel is not as proactive as we could be at the moment.
I think that's really important, Nina, about preventative work in educating young women and girls, to provide them with the emotional confidence to make their own informed choices and build happy relationships and safe relationships. But your second point really links back into what Mary was saying earlier about the onus being on women, and it shouldn't just be on women and girls, it should be on boys and men to take responsibility for their behaviour and learn the core values of respect, and also in terms of general well-being, changing generational perhaps mindsets about that whole culture for women and men. Thank you so much. And I must just quickly highlight to everybody in the audience, please do, as we go along, pop your questions into the chat box, and we will pick them up at the end and try to answer as many as we can. So don't be shy. Any thoughts or observations that occur to you, please do pick those up. Thank you very much, Nina. Going over to Jo. Jo, what do you think are the urgent priority needs from your perspective in terms of working towards a gender equal world?
Well, I guess it's picking up on something that Nina just talked about around education, but it's kind of how those larger scale changes are made to make sure that these conversations in particular are embedded in cross-wide county practice. Now, I'm very conscious that we're about to, or we are in the middle of, probably the most political upheaval that the county has seen with the kind of transference to the new unitaries. And I guess I feel like in our county, women have too often been excluded from some of the high level decision making. And I think we've got a real opportunity with these unitaries to be working, lobbying, thinking about how we make sure women are part of these conversations as we go forward, so that actually, you know, what consultation has taken place as the unitary blueprints have been created, dealing with, gosh, the most extraordinary range of statutory services. Where has that consultation taken place to make sure that these issues are tackled and that change is made, and that we kind of root the needs relating to gender equality throughout everything? And I guess also picking up on what Susie said is that acknowledgement that gender equality isn't necessarily just about the specific level of support women and girls needs, but it's about the kind of pressure that we see on men in not seeking professional help to the same extent as women, to the kind of likelihood around male suicide, all those kind of things, which is absolutely fundamental to gender equality, and try and understand in our unitaries how they want to position those issues, how they're going to help, and how that can then hopefully filter through down to all those statutory services. I know that the kind of role in civic society as all of our charitable objectives is so important, but I kind of want to keep the authorities accountable for the change as well. And I think particularly with elections coming up, we have got a chance to make voices heard, and we've got a chance to lobby and kind of go, you know, it's not all right for these things to be ignored. I want to see them prevalent in people's election campaigns. I want to hear those words being talked about. I want to hear about equality. So I don't have a solution necessarily for how we fix those stuff, but I just kind of feel like there's an opportunity, there's a window here that we need to seize. And maybe it is getting more groups together like this, getting the platform, getting more conversations going, so the conversations are happening and the expectations are shared with those authorities about what we expect with how they're going to make some change with regard to gender equality.
I think that's a really key point, and I do think it's an urgent priority, and I think you expressed it really well, Jo, that we all can have a role in campaigning, influencing and campaigning to local change makers and influencers during this time, whilst we transition into a new unitary infrastructure, and talking to MPs, talking to councillors, asking them what they're going to do to help build gender equality into local policy, and also educate those that may not be thinking about that specifically as an issue. So as we go in towards local elections, it's just a big shout out to everybody to maybe ask your local councillor or representative what they're going to do to help build a gender equal world here on the doorsteps of Northamptonshire. I also think it's really important, and it goes back to a couple of points that have been made about sharing the education responsibility towards men and women, so that symbiotically supporting men means also better safety, better support for women by changing men's attitudes, as well as providing women with the safety net and well-being that they need. So thank you for those very thoughtful comments. Lauren, over to you. What do you think are the urgent priority needs towards building a gender equal world?
Yeah, I guess I'm coming at this question a little bit all ears because I really wanted to hear what the groups on this call were telling us as well, because we want to make sure that our funding is going to the right place in Northamptonshire. But what we're hearing is it's kind of aligned with what we know is happening from the work we do as a company. You know, I also think we can't ignore that we're coming in the midst of coming out of a pandemic that has not only disproportionately impacted women, but it's reversed the progress we've made in terms of gender equality in the last 10 years, particularly around education and employment, which ties into what everybody, I think, has said so far. And I think the news agenda this week has really highlighted, and I saw something on social media today, which encapsulates what everybody has said, which was, it's not about protecting your daughters, it's about educating your sons. And I truly believe that we have to move the conversation forward from just speaking to women. That's really important still, but it's got to be a really inclusive conversation. I mean that in terms of gender, but I also mean that in terms of, you know, intersectionality as well. There are huge parts of our local community, never mind society, that these conversations are going to take a lot longer, and they're going to need a lot more investment when it comes to education as well. So I believe that whether it's gender-based violence or making sure that women have employment opportunities, or just simply representation of women in our day-to-day world, education is kind of the bedrock of all that.
Lauren, Amanda Lanfer in the audience has just reiterated your point that gender equality education needs to start at a young age in schools, and it needs to be a shared responsibility. Gender equality is all of our responsibility, and I think that's what you're saying. And as a donor, I think it's really important that a point that you make, that Avon are listening to the needs on the ground and responding to what those women and girl-led groups are telling you what the need is. So that creates that sort of really, really key donor and community group relationship where you get feedback on where the needs are lying, how they're emerging, and then accordingly you may choose to fund and invest in those and respond to those needs on the ground as well. And I take your point about the pandemic taking us all a step back in terms of education, employment, and rendering particularly women and girls vulnerable at this time. So all the more need for that investment and to influence locally for that change to happen. Thank you so much. We now move on to our next question, and we'll all be aware that this year's International Women's Day theme has been around choose to challenge, in that a challenged world is an alert world, and from challenge comes real meaningful change. And so with this in mind, how do you think we can work together within the community in Northamptonshire to help challenge inequality, call out bias where we see it, question stereotypes, and help forge an inclusive world locally on our doorstep in Northamptonshire? Deepa.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I mean, you know, the theme for this year says, you know, a much wider thing, and what I feel that we currently living in a really divided world, where the practical meaning of inclusion means very different thing to different people. I feel that we need to expand our cross-cultural awareness, reach out to people outside our circle, and engage with them on a personal level. You know, I feel that when you belong to an underrepresented group, the usual dynamics shift. You know, I feel it's very important to be wary of those dynamics. Also to make an effort to be cognizant with issues impacting underrepresented groups, and how these challenges may have been intensified by the pandemic. Because, you know, after all, you cannot change or address what you are not aware of. I feel that encouraging leadership would be, you know, another good approach, because with leadership, you know, leadership comes in many guises, and promoting inspirational role models locally through group work would stimulate conversation and build aspiration for young women and girls. It would empower them to have a voice, to question stereotypes, you know, call out gender bias. I also feel that building a collaborative and supporting network around Northamptonshire, which is more inclusive and helps women to maximize their talents, ambitions, at whatever stage of life they could be, you know, because we do get approached by women who feel that, oh, you know, I didn't have, I couldn't do my education because I was busy with supporting family, this, that, another. Can I still take my GCSEs? So I feel having that sort of support would be really helpful. And choosing to challenge gender bias and inequity really starts by organizing at a community level. Only then I feel that we will be well equipped to fight, you know, these oppressive hierarchies at a structural level. So I feel that collectively we can all create an inclusive support network, you know, throughout our county.
Thank you, Deepa. Some really, really crucial points there about cross-cultural awareness and perhaps people reaching out and talking to communities that they may not have experience of, to listen and learn and understand some of the multiple barriers that may be impacting women and girls, but also to provide a platform to amplify voices that don't typically get heard. So perhaps all of us who are in a position where we have a voice, to help maybe reach out and allow other women and girls to take that space and to be able to present their needs and the needs on the ground, but also to empower women to be leaders within our communities and provide that space and training and confidence to have more leaders within our locality. And also that important point about access to lifelong learning, so that any point during a woman and girl's life, if they want to shift career, go back to education, there's the resources and investment for women and girls to have the confidence to do that within our communities. And most importantly, the point about having an inclusive support network, which goes back to the intersectionality issue again. So thank you so much. Susie, in terms of your vision and in terms of further resources in place, what would you like to see funded out there?
Rachel, we know the next question about calling out bias. So I think you're on mute now.
I'm on mute now. Sorry, this gone terribly wrong. Okay, so no, so in terms, yes, in terms of helping forge an inclusive Northamptonshire by working together to challenge inequality and call out bias and question stereotypes. Thank you for putting me on track.
No, that's fine, but that's the answer I have in my mind, not the other one. So I'm thinking for this one, like, to start personally and within is a good place to start, because we actually, as much as each and every one of us on this call think that we as really open-minded and we don't have bias and we're really aware of equality and blah, blah, blah. Actually, we all have personal stigmas. Every single one of us have personal stigmas. It could be against all sorts of things, you know, color, race, gender, homelessness, addictions, whatever it is. So if we could all look within ourselves as to what our stigmas are, I think that's a really good place to start. And I think the other thing on a kind of a wider scale is having the conversation with people about inequality and calling out bias, rather than telling people what to do, because I think sometimes it's more effective to be in a conversation and be able to ask good questions rather than coming up with good answers for people. So I think that conversation, be it really locally and small in your workplace and in your family, whether it's on wider platforms, is about asking people pertinent questions about the bias you might think they have or the equality, rather than telling them how they should behave.
Thank you for that, Susie. I particularly liked your point about us all being self-aware about our own unconscious bias in terms of the journey towards gender equality. And perhaps that first sort of critical self-awareness is the step towards really listening and asking questions and understanding other women and girls' experiences within our communities. Over to Jo. Jo, what do you feel that we need to be doing to help challenge inequality, call out bias and question stereotypes to forge a more inclusive Northamptonshire?
guess I just wanted to reflect on what you're doing with the foundation for a minute in using these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a focus and a platform for these conversations. One of the areas I'm particularly interested in is how we think about placing more value on the unpaid work that is traditionally done by women. So how we obtain more recognition and better value for that valuation of that unpaid care. And I think one of the ways is by the embracement of these UN goals and raising the platform of those conversations. I mean, that has got to be combined with better measurement, data measurement, but I'm kind of excited about what we as a county could potentially make what do we want to be our message that we are doing differently in other places. And I kind of feel like it's such a global issue, unpaid care work, but I think if we could make steps as a county in really trying to place a value on that work and appreciate that value, the ripples that could have through all of the ways that we've been talking, whether that's about through education and things. I think that's fascinating. And I'd love, Lauren, it's probably a conversation for another day, to unpick a bit more about how perhaps Avon could support with that and sort of really raising the profile of the work that women are doing. How many £1 trillion is it worth? Something like 3 times the global GDP they've valued unpaid care work at, and it's extraordinary. And I think if we could sort of empower that, that's less of a grassroots direct action that I'm so inspired by all my other panel members, but so it's more of a global thing. But I'd love to, particularly in the Q&A afterwards, if there's anyone that's got any thoughts on how we do change the perception of that unpaid care work, and I'd be fascinated.
Thank you, Jo. I think your point there resonates with the strapline of the UN SDGs, which is think global but act local. So it might be a global issue, but it's a local issue too, and it's happening on our doorsteps. And we know through work through Northamptonshire carers that there is a wealth of in effect volunteers, unpaid volunteers across our county, women who are doing extraordinary care work, and also in terms of women's labour at home as well. And it's also about questioning stereotypes in that sense, and the role of women, but the value of that work and how important and key it is, and yet it's invisible. And the whole idea of being able to measure that as well. So the Community Foundation has an impact assessment framework, and it will be starting to measure its work also in line with the UN SDGs. So watch this space. Lauren, over to you.
Yeah, really interesting points raised by everybody so far. I think I wanted to bring to this question, maybe thinking it a bit more, and actually Susie, I think you touched on this, from an individual level, what we can all do in our own circle of influence. If we are having these conversations, challenging, asking those questions in our own circle of influence, and that is going to have a ripple effect. And it does seem a bit whimsical sometimes to talk, you know, one person can make a difference, but I truly believe that, and we're all passionate about supporting our local community. So I think the individual impact can't be underestimated. Just to call out bias when you see it, to challenge discrimination when you see it in a constructive way, and that goes back to education. So it can be really draining to do that. If you're an activist at heart, it can be really draining to do that. So it's making sure that you know where the education is, so you can signpost to people, so you don't have to keep having those difficult conversations. But I think it's really important that we challenge ourselves and think, what can we do in our own circle of influence? And then I guess with that tying into Avon, you know, we have a huge army of representatives across the UK, hundreds in Northamptonshire. Often they are women, and often they are from quite vulnerable backgrounds. So we need to make sure that we are sharing their stories of the challenges they've overcome and listening to their needs as well. Because I would imagine many of them are from the backgrounds where or communities where we need to support as well. So I think it's about telling stories within your own network and sharing the stories of the people that we we are trying to strive for a better world for.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that's a real call out to all of us to become ambassadors of gender equality and make sure that we're having those conversations in an everyday context. You're right, it can be exhausting to be calling out gender inequality where we see it, but if we all collectively make that effort, then it makes the job far easier. But also about stories and narratives. In terms of the facts and stats that we heard from Mary at the beginning, we need really to add the richness and context of that with the women and girls whose stories we should be telling, because there will be a number of women and girls, once they hear those stories, who will say, that's happened to me as well. Maybe I feel a bit more confident in sharing my story because somebody else is sharing their story. And then we can really get the conversation to be a meaningful an exchange for many women and girls within our county. So thank you for that. We now move on to our last question, but by no means the least significant. And it's a bit of a big ask, and we ask this to each panel that we bring together. I hope that you can enlighten us in terms of where you think we should be in 2030. So first of all, over to Deepa. What is your vision for Northamptonshire in 2030? What do you hope we can have achieved by then to achieve gender equality for women and girls on our doorstep? What's your vision of 2030 in terms of gender equality in Northamptonshire?
So I feel the vision for 2030 for me would be a well-funded inclusive services for women and girls, where they get the support in the way they need and how they need it, where the operational and the governance is reflective of their needs, individual needs. Also, it'd be good to sort of see more diverse and inclusive public service representation. So ideally, it'd be great to see more women in the police, fire service, in the cabinet. And I also actually hope that by then women are just not celebrated just that one day as International Women's Day. We're able to celebrate their achievements every day. Every achievement could be celebrated whenever. So yeah, I think that would be my sort of vision, sort of having sort of more inclusive networks.
Thank you, Deepa. So in 2030, we'll be living in a world where we will have done away with the need for International Women's Day. We won't be having to celebrate it anymore because gender equality will be here on our doorsteps, and we will have diverse and inclusive workforce that represents women from all walks of life in our local services, so that people, and particularly women, can see their faces in the services around them, and also well-funded and flexible and bespoke services for women and girls in their journey across their life. Thank you. Moving over to Susie, what's your vision for Northamptonshire in 2030 for gender equality?
So if we get this right between ourselves, then in 2030 we'll be having this conversation, and that would be great. That's the first point. Just to not even have to be discussing gender equality, because it's just accepted and it's supported and it's well funded. So I think if by 2030 we have different services for different cohorts of people, be that male, female, young people, BAME, whatever it is, but it's just an accepted thing that people are different and they need different support, and that's the end of that. That would be great.
Okay, so that was a very concise and direct ambitious achievement for 2030, and I hope we will get to a world where we will have no need to be talking and discussing gender equality, because we'll have already created a world of the education and support services and resources to ensure that services were bespoke towards individual needs across our communities. Thank you. Nina, what's your vision for Northamptonshire in 2030? What do you hope we will have achieved by then to have gender equality on our doorsteps?
With the world being our oyster and everybody being an individual, everybody should be celebrated in every which way possible. But unfortunately, 2030 is not that far away. And to actually get all of that done in 6 years' time, you know, or 8 years' time, or 10 years' time, or it is going to be a huge ask. So tackle the bits that we can do, make sure that we can instill that, tackle the educational side of the young people now, so that in the future it is getting better. I can't see it happening completely by 2030, but by hopefully soon after that, on a realistic measure. We're talking about centuries worth of inequality, and to change it within a decade is a huge ask. So let's get it as close as we can get, as educational as we can get, by basically educating our younger people as much as possible and supporting those that are still struggling.
Thank you, Nina. So that's in terms of we've got to start the journey somewhere, and we might not achieve it by 2030. In fact, it may take 100 years, but we've got to start somewhere, and we've got to move more swiftly and take more seriously the need to build gender equality into our services, activities and our communities. And what a better place to start.
Sorry, we need to do it in bite-sized chunks and set ourselves realistic goals, achieve those goals and set the next realistic goals to get to where our end game would be.
I think that's a really poignant point. When something seems overwhelming, break it down into achievable chunks and then start the hard work. Thank you. And particularly the point about the key area where we start that work is through education. Jo, moving on to you, what do you hope we can have achieved by 2030 in terms of gender equality?
Well, I agree with Nina. I think it's about setting realistic goals. I guess I would like to see a shift against an awful lot of measurable impacts. So I think it was Victoria Miles in the chat that said shift the power. I love that explanation. And actually, if by 2030 we see more women in those leadership roles, those decision-making roles across the county, I think if we see more women into the vocational roles and things that Deepa was talking about that aren't traditionally as expected to be female roles as possible. I think, Rachel, as you're putting your impact assessment kind of work together, if we can see a reduction in violence towards women and girls because of the work that all of the brilliant charities and support services in the county can do, then, and gosh, you know, what about if we measured a greater step towards equal pay in amongst that? I kind of have ambitions for a long list, but perhaps just smaller adjustments in each. And I think if we've achieved even some of those by 2030, then the community cohesion and outcomes that will flow from those changes will be demonstration enough that it's worth investing, it's worth the focus, and give us all the kind of confidence that we all need to keep that rally cry about shifting the power.
And so I think, Jo, you're saying there that the proof will be in the pudding in 2030 if we see more women in leadership roles, and also women in jobs and employment that perhaps have traditionally, historically been perceived as male orientated roles. In terms of our impact work, I think it's fair to say the Community Foundation is one part of the puzzle. Our ability to make an impact on those figures also relates to national and local policy and investment into the voluntary sector. So if we can keep campaigning and influencing for more funds into the sector to do that real work on the ground, I think that will help move towards shifting some of those awful statistics. Lauren, what's your vision for 2030? What would you like to see for gender equality by that time in Northamptonshire?
Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but it's not long, is it? It's not long at all. It would be amazing, wouldn't it, if we weren't having these conversations? That's not going to happen in 9 years. I think any sort of progress is what we want to strive towards. I really hope that representation increases, like we've just spoken about, that we're seeing women in positions where young girls have role models. So I think the role model piece is really important. We're having women's voices heard across a number of different sectors, a number of different communities. But I also hope that we have got those different solutions that Susie was talking about in place, because the problems are still going to be there, the issues are still going to be there in 9 years' time. But I really hope that there are solutions actually tailored to the needs of women in Northamptonshire, not just a blanket one size fits all at the moment, because we have some amazing solutions at the moment, but there are many women out there whose stories we don't know and haven't reached out for support. So I really hope we're able to provide a tailored support network, because we will still be tackling these issues in 2030.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Keeping it real, but any progress is good. And what we would ideally like to see by 2030 at the very least is a bigger network of female role models for young women and girls, particularly to be inspired by as the next generation of women leaders within their locality and communities, whatever role it is they're in within the workforce or within the community, and also more women's voices and making sure that intersectionality happens across all sectors. And making sure that the services that we provide relate to people's experience and not somebody's idea of how services should be provided for all. And that takes, going back to what we said, the listening exercise within our local communities. You've all been absolutely amazing. And I have a whole list of notes that I've been taking as I go as chair to sum up. So I'm going to try and hard to sum up, but just to very quickly say that we will now go to Q&A, which will be led by my wonderful work colleague, Sandy. If there are no particular Q&A, there might be a couple of questions that we will generate for the panel, and then we'll have a sort of a call to action and a thank you from our chair, Paul Southworth. But I think some of the things to particularly note that's been spoke about is the importance of investing in education, the importance that gender equality is a shared responsibility across all our communities, and the focus shouldn't just be on women and girls, that we need proper resources and investment in safe spaces. We need to work together to campaign and influence the local agenda for investment into women-specific activity, projects and supports. We need to amplify women's voices from across all our communities, particularly those voices that have traditionally been unheard. We need to be flexible and creative about the solutions that we come up with in terms of supporting women and girls within our communities. We really need to invest resources into tackling male violence and also sexual violence within our communities, and make sure that there are resources there. We need to continue the conversation across different women and listen to their experiences. And we need to be realistic about what we can achieve by 2030, but any progress is good. And by starting these conversations, hopefully we can contribute and be ambassadors of gender equality, and make sure, importantly, just picking up on Lauren's point, that on a day-to-day basis, as ambassadors, we call out and challenge gender stereotypes, inequality, and make a small difference in a daily way. So thank you for our inspiring panel. And we're not asking you to go away yet, so I'm going to hand over to Sandy and pick up on any questions or key observations that we can engage the panel with. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So there's not been so many questions as such, but lots of lovely supportive comments to the very, very inspiring panel, including, so from Tina Matthews, Northamptonshire Rape Crisis will be undertaking educational work in schools alongside police and teachers once we can get back out there. This is a really important project for us. We will focus on understanding sexual violence and consent. So I thought that was really worth noting. And they've also noted for International Women's Day, 16 local business women took it on themselves to raise awareness of their work. They choose to challenge the stigma around sexual violence. Often this comes from women, and sharing within the network made it easier for them to have the conversation. They were alarmed when they saw the stats. And I'll just go through a few more comments. There was one question here, and it looks like it's been answered as well. So this is from Jan Hall from the Thomas's Fund. Is there an easy way to find a list of support groups and networks for different groups that we could signpost to our families relating to all issues of inequality and make Northants more inclusive for all? Sometimes quite difficult to find the specific services or support groups. Alex has actually answered that for her. So local infrastructure organisations like VIN, Voluntary Impact Northants, are working on putting together a local list of services for the public to access. So that's kind of, I mean, there's a few more here. If anyone does have any questions, if you want to pop your hand up and then we can sort of go through it that way, or I'm happy to go through some more comments. Rashmi, did you want to ask that yourself, or I can ask on behalf of yourself? How do we educate men? Okay, well, I'll take that to the panel. So if we go with Deepa.
Hi, Sandy, and yes, Rashmi Ben's made a valid point. How do we educate men? Because it is that their mentality right from the beginning that they're not supposed to do the cooking, the cleaning. The onus really is on women, and it's all about those structural, social norms as it is. And I think in terms of being able to kind of educate them that it's about equality, it's about sharing workload. We're now in time where women are equally working, looking after family, and professionally working as well, and therefore it is all about that equality where they share responsibility. And I think that's more about being able to help these whether we can do these workshops, kind of talk about it, talk more about the different roles that women have now evolved and having to do. I guess that might be a good start.
Great answer. Okay, so we've got a next question. This is from Miranda. What can male leaders, if a female leader is not a post holder, do to demonstrate that they consider gender equality in their work? And I'll take that to Jo Gordon.
It's a really good question, isn't it? Because I think there are many, certainly of my colleagues, who have a kind of natural affinity to raising and amplifying women's voices, and I think that some of those male leaders have to take responsibility for sharing that with other male leaders. I don't think it should be a women's job to educate men into how to behave all the time. I know it's a conversation that from an intersectional perspective crosses all sorts of arenas to do with diversity, but I kind of feel like we actually have to put onus on men to do some learning, to understand, to look to the female role models in their lives to try and understand some of these areas. I certainly think particularly in a workplace, that there is a strong ethos around equality and a strong equality action plan, then understanding how they can demonstrate progress against those kind of actions and do that visibly and palpably for the organisation is really important, and not be frightened to challenge themselves in front of people, to call themselves out. That's another thing I find really empowering in male leaders, those that are willing to kind of go, I need your perspective on this, I can't do this, I don't understand yet. I think that's the different side of asking women for help and to do the work, that sort of admitting of kind of where they're still learning to do from a male perspective would be my starter.
Can I just add as well, I think it's really important, like women shouldn't have to do the work here. Like we're talking about the unpaid work that women do in all walks of our life, and educating men about the fundamentals of gender equality isn't one that we should do alone. And I also think it's really important, and this comes when we're having conversations about any sort of issue of discrimination or intersectionality, it's not enough to say, oh, I have a daughter, so I know what that felt experience is, or I have a sister or an aunt or whatever. Listen, take heed, and then go forward and share that word. I feel really passionately about that.
Definitely. And there was also a comment from Mary here. I don't know if Mary wants to speak herself, or I can speak on your behalf. There she is.
Hello, that was the last one I've just shared, that one. Yeah, so I was just going to say that there's stereotypes, but obviously we choose to challenge. We're challenging stereotypes that we face every day. And I think it's just important in that same breath to challenge the stereotype of what it is to be a man. And I know that there's a lot of young men who their role models are people I would hate for them to aspire to be. Sadly, that's who they look up to, and therefore they're learning from the men in their lives who maybe aren't what we want them to be. I think that a big part of it comes into education again, doesn't it? It's helping young boys to understand that to be a man doesn't mean you have to be aggressive, you don't have to be pushy, you don't have to be, overriding women around you. You can be a man and still be very respectful to them in your life, and so on. So I think that's a really important part when we talk about sort of gender equality. We have to make sure that stereotype is addressed as well.
Well, I think this is our longest standing community conversation, and lots of food for thought, lots of really challenging comments and observations, lots of inspirational actions and calls to action, and work already being done on the ground. Thank you so much to our panel. We'll now hand over to our chair, and may I say gender equality ally, Paul Southworth, to wrap up. Paul.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Rachel, and good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations, first of all, to the panel and all the fabulous work that you're doing across the county on this particular subject. I do, however, have some observations, and particularly it relates to one of the latter questions, which is, how do we educate men? I'd like to, first of all, to make the observation that here we are this afternoon on a wonderful forum, sharing all of our ideas, but we have a screen full of women. Where are the men who should be taking part in this forum? Where are the men who should be listening to the points that you're making? Where are the senior management of the major companies in Northamptonshire? They should be part of this forum. And we should be, in terms of one of the plans of action, if you like, is to shame them into coming onto such forums and listening to what you have to say. Because, we talked about where will we be in 2030? Well, the reality is, if we really want to make major progress in that short space of time, then we have to bring the male population on board. Right now, we're all talking to the converted. We're talking to each other who believe in what we're saying. We have to educate those that currently don't listen to these kind of conversations, because that's the fastest way that we will accelerate the change that is needed. And if I could just take a minute to kind of relate my own journey as to where I was many years ago to how I think now and why I'm proud to be a champion for gender equality. I was also with that great company Avon, and Lauren will relate to this. I joined Avon in 1973. In that year, it is true to say that the entire business world was totally male dominated. It was unthinkable that you would have a woman heading a major company. In Avon, when I joined as what they call a management associate, a division sales manager in training. And it astounded me when I joined the company that every single management position above me in the UK, in the companies in over 100 countries in the world, and particularly in New York, where the head office was, every management position was male. And that is in a cosmetics company. It was ridiculous. And thankfully, I was working alongside some women at that time who truly educated me. This was the light bulb moment for me, if you like. And as I progressed through my career in Avon, as I got to positions where I could have an influence to make a change, I did so because of what those women taught me. And the first and most major thing we all have to accept is that men and women think differently. It's right brain and left brain. But what a lot of people don't get, and particularly men in senior management, etc., that if you can join those two left and right thoughts together, the power of the outcome is literally twice as great. In my journey over the last, in that 50 years I was with Avon, 40 odd years I was with Avon, sorry, I was with Avon for 25 years, but that's, you know, in that particular time, it was terrific to be able to see the changes that started to be made, where Avon truly did become a company for women and started to, at last, recognize the value of women in management and more particularly in the boardroom. And it was not a coincidence that as that change went through the company, the success of the company grew and grew because of the influence of the women who started to come into decision-making positions. Women in the boardroom add value. Women in management add value. And the more men begin to realize that, then they will recognize the advantages that they can have in their organizations. And I truly believe that education of men, that shaming them into coming into these conversations is critical to the way forward. So I think whatever action plan you all draw together, and I come to what Joe was saying and what Lauren was saying, what we have to do is get to the influencers within our county and force them to sit down and talk to us, whether they're MPs, councillors, or major business people. All of them should be brought to this table to join in this conversation. So I wish you well, and I don't think, it took me 50 years from where I started on this journey in gender equality to where I am today. I hope the next 10 years is going to be far faster in terms of the advancement you made. So thank you very much, everybody, for being part of this conversation.
And thank you, Paul, for being our gender ambassador, gender equality ambassador for UN SDG 5 alongside Mary. Just to let you know, following on from that, we will have a call to action from each of the community conversations. We are setting an action plan, and this autumn we will launch our first local United Nations Charter for Northamptonshire. So we're bringing people with us along the way, and we're working on those actions and providing regular news about what we're doing to address each one of the goals that we have a conversation about. Without much further ado, I think I'm going to hand over the final thanks and goodbye to our UN SDG Gender Equality Ambassador, Mary.
Thank you, Rachel. Just a huge thank you to the panelists for being here. It's been a really inspiring talk. As I said, I'm incredibly passionate about this subject. Yet even I'm kind of got this buzz about me now, thinking what can we do together that raises our voices, which gets us out there. So many incredible questions that have got me thinking, okay, what can I do differently that's going to help to move this forward? Thank you. We've had over 30 people join us on the call today, and that's just phenomenal. So yes, it's just a huge thank you. If there is anything that you can think of that we can do, that I can do, that the foundation can do, please get in touch with me. I'm truly passionate about sort of taking this forward, the next step. I've said before, Avon is actually our only fund holder that we currently have, which is deliberately targeting issues that affect women and girls. And I want to change that. I want to make sure that there are other fund holders that we can bring on that are going to tackle this issue, because I think it's such an important issue. It affects many of the other UN SDGs. So when we talk about things like domestic violence, that of course has knock-on effects to people's mental health. It all integrates together. So it's so important to have these conversations. But thank you for your time. I won't keep you any longer. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep talking, keep raising your voices, and we'll take this forward into 2030 and beyond. Thank you.